The fluorescent lights of the Value Mart hummed a dreary song, a soundtrack to John's equally dreary Tuesday evening. Each item he scanned and bagged felt heavier than its actual weight, a tiny addition to the mountain of responsibilities pressing down on his shoulders. His shift as a part-time stocker and occasional cashier was nearing its end, but the fatigue had settled deep in his bones hours ago. It wasn't just the physical toll of lifting crates and standing for hours. It was the weariness of a life lived on the precarious edge of making ends meet, a life shadowed by a loss that still felt as raw as an open wound. John managed a faint, polite smile for the customer whose groceries he was currently processing, a young mother with two restless children tugging at her coat. He understood that particular brand of tired. He knew it intimately. His own daughter, Lily, would be waiting for him, probably with her homework spread across their small kitchen table. Her bright, inquisitive eyes looking for him the moment he walked through the door. She was the sun in his often overcast world, the single, unwavering reason he kept putting one foot in front of the other. The apartment they shared was small, 2 rooms that always seemed to hold the lingering scent of toast and the faint, sweet aroma of Lily's strawberry shampoo. It was a far cry from the house he and Sarah had dreamed of, the one with the little garden and the tire swing in the backyard. Sarah. Her name was a whisper in his heart, a melody he could still hear if he listened hard enough in the quiet moments. It had been 3 years since the illness had stolen her from them, leaving a void that John feared would never truly be filled. He saw her in Lily's smile, in the determined set of her small chin, in the way she hummed off-key when she was concentrating. These glimpses were both a comfort and a persistent ache. His current existence was a carefully constructed routine of work, childcare, and an endless juggling of bills. The part-time hours at Value Mart were barely enough, supplemented by odd fix-it jobs he picked up whenever he could. A leaky faucet here, a wobbly shelf there. He was good with his hands, a skill inherited from his father, but opportunities were scarce, and his primary concern was always being there for Lily. His social life was non-existent. Friendships had faded in the wake of grief and the relentless demands of single parenthood. Loneliness was a quiet, unwelcome companion, most intrusive in the late hours after Lily was asleep, when the silence of the apartment amplified his thoughts. A faded photograph of Sarah, tucked into the frame of the small mirror by the door, was often the last thing he saw before heading out, and the first to greet him upon his return. Her smile in the picture was radiant, full of the life and love that had once defined his world. Sometimes, he'd trace the outline of her face with his thumb, a silent conversation passing between them. "I'm trying, Sarah. I'm really trying." It was his mantra, his plea to a memory. The store manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose thinning hair seemed to reflect his equally thin patience, gave a pointed look at the clock. John nodded, finishing with his current customer and switching off his till light. Another shift done, another small step forward, or at least not backward. That was often the best he could hope for. As he clocked out, the familiar anxieties began to churn. Had he remembered to pack Lily's lunch for school tomorrow? Was there enough milk for her cereal? The big one, always lurking, was the rent, due at the end of the week. He pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the immediate future, picking up a few essentials for dinner and then heading home to Lily. He was tired, yes, but the thought of her small hand slipping into his, of her excited chatter about her day, was a powerful antidote. The grocery aisles, usually a place of mundane routine, felt different when he was shopping for himself, for Lily. He was more conscious of prices, his eyes scanning for special offers, his mind doing quick calculations. A small pack of chicken? Some potatoes? A carton of orange juice? Lily's favorite. He allowed himself a small indulgence, a chocolate bar for her, a little treat to brighten her evening. His own needs were secondary, almost an afterthought. It was as he was heading towards the exit, his own meager basket in hand, that he noticed her. An elderly woman, her silver hair neatly coiffed, was struggling near the automatic doors. Several bags of groceries sat on the floor around her, and she was fumbling with a rather large, unwieldy sack of flour that seemed determined to tip over. She looked flustered, her cheeks slightly flushed. There was a determined set to her jaw, but her movements were hesitant, betraying a fragility that tugged at something in John. He hesitated for only a moment. His own weariness, his own hurry to get home, faded into the background. It was a simple, almost instinctual response. He had a mother once. He had a wife. He knew what it was to need a hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," John said, his voice gentle. "Would you like some help with those bags?" The woman startled, her bright blue eyes, surprisingly sharp and intelligent, focusing on him. For a second, he saw a flicker of suspicion, the caution of someone accustomed to navigating the world alone. Then, it softened, replaced by a look of relief. "Oh, my dear boy," she sighed, a delicate, papery sound. "That would be most kind. I seem to have overestimated my carrying capacity today. My eyes are always bigger than my arms, or so my Arthur used to say." A faint, wistful smile touched her lips. John smiled back, a genuine, unforced expression that reached his tired eyes. "It happens to the best of us. Where's your car?" "Just out front, the blue one. A little Ford. Rather like me. Seen better days, but still chugging along." She gestured vaguely, with a gloved hand. Without another word, John easily lifted two of the larger bags. "Lead the way." He noticed the contents: baking chocolate, vanilla extract, bags of sugar, yeast. Someone was planning a serious baking session. He followed her out into the cool evening air. A light drizzle had begun to fall, slicking the asphalt and making the streetlights gleam like amber orbs. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers stiff in the damp air. John waited patiently, shielding the paper bags from the worst of the rain with his body. Finally, the trunk of the small blue Ford clicked open. He carefully placed the bags inside, arranging them so nothing would topple. He then went back for the remaining bags, including the troublesome sack of flour, which he handled with an ease that made the elderly woman sigh again, this time in sheer appreciation. "Oh, thank you, young man. You are a lifesaver," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. She reached into her handbag. "Please, let me give you something for your trouble." John held up a hand, shaking his head. "No, please, don't worry about it. It was no trouble at all. Happy to help." He gave another small smile. "You have a good evening now, and drive safe." She looked at him. Really looked at him then, her gaze lingering on his face. He saw a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or a deeper assessment. "You are very kind," she said softly. "It's refreshing. Just trying to be a decent human being," John replied, feeling a slight flush creep up his neck. He wasn't used to such direct acknowledgement. He was more accustomed to blending into the background. "Take care." He gave a small nod and turned to walk towards the bus stop, his own small basket of groceries feeling suddenly lighter. He didn't look back. It was a small act, a moment of connection in a day filled with mundane tasks. He thought no more of it than he would of holding a door open for someone or offering directions. It was just something you did. By the time he boarded the bus, the encounter had already begun to recede in his mind, overshadowed by the more pressing realities of his life. The warmth of the bus, the rhythmic rumble of its engine, lulled him into a state of weary contemplation, his thoughts already turning to Lily and the evening ahead. The rest of John's day unfolded with its usual rhythm. Lily greeted him at the door with a hug that momentarily erased all his fatigue. Her school day had been filled with the monumental dramas of an 8-year-old. A lost pencil, a new friend, a fascinating story about caterpillars. He listened patiently, helping her sound out difficult words in her reading homework, marveling at her earnest concentration. Dinner was simple but companionable, their conversation punctuated by Lily's laughter. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed, her soft breathing filling her small room, John sat at the kitchen table. The bills were spread out before him, a familiar landscape of demands. The numbers swam before his tired eyes. Rent. Utilities. The overdue payment on the small loan he'd taken out after Sarah's medical expenses had overwhelmed them. He rubbed his temples, the dull ache there a constant companion. How much longer can I keep this up? The thought was a cold serpent coiling in his stomach. He was doing his best. He truly was. But his best never seemed to be quite enough. There was no safety net, no cushion, just him and Lily and the relentless march of days. He thought of Sarah, as he often did in these quiet, desperate moments. What would she have done? She'd always had a practical optimism, a way of finding solutions where he only saw problems. She would have encouraged him, reminded him of his strengths. But Sarah was gone, and he was left to navigate this labyrinth alone. He missed her guidance, her comfort, her unwavering belief in him. Most nights, sleep offered a brief respite, but tonight his mind raced, replaying the calculations, the worries, the what-ifs. The brief encounter in the grocery store parking lot was a distant, almost forgotten flicker, a tiny pinprick of light in a vast darkness. It hadn't registered as anything more than a fleeting moment of shared humanity. He certainly harbored no expectation that such a small gesture would ever ripple back into his life. Meanwhile, across town, in a cozy little house filled with the scent of old books and lemon polish, Mistress Eleanor Albright sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside her. The groceries were put away, the sack of flour nestled in its rightful place in the pantry. But her mind wasn't on baking, not yet. It was on the young man from the grocery store. She had seen many people in her 78 years, witnessed countless acts of both kindness and indifference. But there was something about him, his quiet politeness, the genuine warmth in his tired eyes, the way he had refused any payment so simply, so sincerely. It wasn't the act itself, which was merely helpful, but the spirit behind it. He hadn't been looking for recognition or reward. He had simply seen someone in need and offered his strength without a second thought. Eleanor had been thinking a lot lately about the bakery, the sweet spot. It had been her husband Arthur's dream, and after his passing, her life's work. For 50 years, it had served the community, a place of warmth and sweetness, its counters laden with breads, cakes, and pastries made with love. But her own energy was waning. The early mornings, the lifting, the standing, it was all becoming too much. She had no children of her own, no family to pass it on to. The thought of selling it to some faceless corporation, one that would strip its heart and soul for profit, was unbearable. For months, she had been observing, hoping, praying for a sign, for the right person to appear. Someone who understood that a community bakery was more than just a business. It was a gathering place, a source of comfort, a small, sweet anchor in people's lives. She needed someone with a good heart, a kind soul, someone who would cherish it as she and Arthur had. Tonight, watching that young man, something had clicked. His gentle interaction with her, the almost unconscious way he shielded her bags from the rain. It spoke volumes. "You're the kind of person this community needs," she thought, the words forming clearly in her mind. It was a sudden, startling conviction, but it felt undeniably right. She was a woman who trusted her instincts, and her instincts were rarely wrong. She'd made a decision, a rather impulsive one perhaps by some standards, but one that filled her with a surprising sense of peace and purpose. She knew his face now. She would find him. The next morning dawned grey and damp, mirroring John's mood. He woke with the familiar weight on his chest, the anxieties of the previous night clinging to him like the morning mist outside his window. Lily was already up, humming as she poured cereal, her youthful energy a stark contrast to his own leaden feelings. He forced a smile, trying to shield her from his worries. They were his burden to bear, not hers. After dropping Lily at school, a small, brave figure disappearing into the bustling schoolyard, John made his way to the Value Mart for his morning shift. He was a few minutes early, a habit born of a deep-seated fear of losing even this tenuous lifeline of employment. As he approached the employee entrance at the back of the store, he saw a familiar small blue Ford parked nearby. And standing beside it, holding a large manila envelope, was the elderly woman from the previous evening, Mistress Albright. He remembered her name now, or rather, she had told him her husband used to call her by it, but the mistress felt formal. He remembered her bright eyes. "Good morning," she called out, her voice surprisingly strong in the quiet morning air. A small, almost mischievous smile played on her lips. John stopped, surprised. "Good morning, ma'am. Is everything all right? Did you forget something in your car yesterday?" He glanced at the envelope. A flicker of unease stirring. Was this about some perceived damage to her groceries? Had he inadvertently broken something? "Everything is more than all right, young man," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Thanks to you. I found out from the store manager, a rather brusque fellow named Henderson, when your shift started. I hope you don't mind." "No, not at all," John said, still puzzled. "Is there something I can do for you?" He was acutely aware of the minutes ticking by, of Mr. Henderson's intolerance for tardiness. "Actually," Mistress Albright said, stepping closer, "there is something I can do for you." She held out the manila envelope. "My name is Eleanor Albright, and this," she tapped the envelope, "is for you." John stared at the envelope, then back at her face. I don't understand." "Yesterday," Eleanor began, her voice earnest, "you performed an act of kindness for an old woman, expecting nothing in return. You were gentle, respectful, and you asked for nothing. I have been looking for someone like you for a very long time, John." He was startled that she knew his name. "Henderson, of course. Looking for me? For what?" "I own a small business in this town," Eleanor continued, her gaze steady and unwavering. "A bakery. It's called the Sweet Spot. Perhaps you've heard of it?" John nodded slowly. He had. It was a charming little place on Miller Avenue, a bit old-fashioned, but always smelling wonderfully of cinnamon and yeast. Lily loved their gingerbread cookies. "Yes, it's a lovely place. It has been my life, and my husband Arthur's before me," she said, a touch of wistfulness in her voice. "But I am old, John. It is time for me to rest. I have no family to leave it to, and the thought of it falling into the wrong hands, well, it pains me." She took a deep breath. "Inside this envelope are the papers, legally drawn up by my solicitor. I am signing over the ownership of the Sweet Spot Bakery to you." John felt the world tilt. The hum of the early morning traffic, the distant shout of a delivery driver, the damp chill in the air, it all receded into a dull roar in his ears. He stared at her, speechless. His mind simply couldn't process her words. It had to be a joke, a misunderstanding, some sort of elaborate prank. You're giving me your bakery," he finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. He felt a hysterical laugh bubble up, but suppressed it. Eleanor's smile was serene. "Yes, John, I am. Free and clear. The building, the equipment, the recipes, the goodwill, it's all yours." "But why?" he stammered, his brow furrowed in utter confusion. "You don't know me. I helped you with your groceries, that's all. It was nothing." "It was everything, John," Eleanor said softly, her eyes shining with a conviction that was impossible to doubt. "It showed me your character. I saw a good man, a kind man, someone who isn't driven by greed, but by something more fundamental. You're the kind of person this community needs, John." The kind of person I want to entrust with something so precious to me. I want the sweet spot to continue to be a place of warmth and joy, and I believe you are the one who can ensure that." John felt his legs tremble. He leaned against the brick wall of the Value Mart for support. His mind was a whirlwind of disbelief, shock, and a bewildering nascent flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. I don't know anything about baking or running a business. I'm a stocker. I fix leaky pipes. You can learn, Eleanor said gently. Skills can be taught. Character cannot. I have a wonderful woman, Martha, who has worked for me for 30 years. She knows everything there is to know about the baking, the suppliers. She can guide you. And I will help in any way I can, for as long as you need me. She pressed the envelope into his unresisting hand. His fingers felt numb. The solicitor's office is expecting you this afternoon, if you're willing. Mr. Davies will explain everything. No pressure, John. Think about it. But my offer is sincere. He looked down at the heavy envelope, then back at Eleanor Albright. Her expression was open, earnest, utterly genuine. This wasn't a dream. This was happening. I need to sit down, he mumbled. Eleanor's smile softened with understanding. Of course, dear boy. There's a little cafe just around the corner. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. And perhaps a very large donut. John nodded dumbly, allowing himself to be led. His shift at Value Mart, Mr. Henderson, the looming rent. It all seemed to belong to another lifetime. A lifetime that had existed only minutes ago. He was walking, but his feet barely seemed to touch the ground. A bakery. His own bakery. It was too immense, too sudden, too good to be true. And yet, the weight of the envelope in his hand was undeniable. An act of kindness, a simple gesture he'd barely registered, had somehow, impossibly, changed everything. The small cafe was warm and smelled of coffee beans and toasted bagels. Eleanor guided John to a quiet booth in the corner and ordered them both coffees and, true to her word, a large cinnamon donut for John, which he stared at as if it were an alien artifact. His mind was still reeling, trying to catch up with the seismic shift that had just occurred. "Mistress Albright." "Eleanor," he began, his voice still shaky. "I don't know what to say. It's overwhelming." He looked at the manila envelope lying on the table between them. It felt like a tangible piece of a dream. "Call me Eleanor, please, John," she said kindly, her blue eyes studying him with a gentle perceptiveness. "And I understand it's a shock. It was a rather sudden decision on my part, too, truth be told. But sometimes the best decisions are the ones made from the heart. Don't you think?" He took a gulp of the hot coffee. It scalded his tongue, but the sensation helped to ground him slightly. "But why me? There must be other people. People with experience. People who deserve it more." The ingrained humility, the years of feeling like he was just getting by, made it hard to accept such an extraordinary gift. Undeserving. The word echoed in his mind. Deserve? Eleanor mused, stirring her coffee slowly. What does that mean, truly? Does someone who is skilled but unkind deserve it more than someone who is kind but unskilled? I don't think so. Arthur and I built the sweet spot with love, John. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating something good for our neighbors, a little haven. I saw that same goodness in you yesterday. A quiet, unassuming decency. That's rarer than baking skills, believe me, and far more valuable in the long run. John thought of Lily. If this was real, if this incredible, impossible thing was actually happening, what would it mean for her? A stable future? A life where he wasn't constantly worried, constantly exhausted? A life where he could provide more than just the bare necessities? The thought was a dizzying, terrifying, wonderful prospect. "I have a daughter," he said softly, the words almost a confession. "Lily, she's 8, she's everything to me." Eleanor's smile widened. "A daughter, how wonderful. Then you understand about wanting to build something, to nurture it. Think of the bakery as something you can nurture, something that can, in turn, help you nurture her." She paused, then added, "Martha, my head baker and shop manager, is a treasure. She's been with me since she was a girl. She's loyal, hard-working, and knows the business inside out. She was worried about what would happen when I retired. I think she'll be relieved to know the bakery is in good hands, or rather, hands I trust to become good." "But I'd be her boss," John said, a new wave of anxiety hitting him. "I don't know how to be a boss. What if I make a mess of everything? What if I fail? I'd be letting you down, letting Martha down, letting Lily down." The fear of failure was a familiar foe, one that had shadowed him for years. "Oh, fiddle," Eleanor said with a dismissive wave of her hand, though her eyes remained kind. "Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning something new. The important thing is to learn from them. And you won't be alone. I'll be there to advise if you want me. Martha will be there. The recipes are all written down, clear as day." Arthur was very meticulous. She leaned forward slightly. "John, I'm not expecting you to be a master baker overnight, or a seasoned businessman. I'm giving you an opportunity, a chance. What you do with it is up to you, but I have a feeling, a very strong feeling, that you'll rise to the occasion." He looked at her, truly looked at the conviction in her eyes. She believed in him, this woman who barely knew him. It was a startling, unnerving, yet profoundly moving realization. When was the last time someone, other than Sarah, had expressed such faith in him? "The solicitor, Mr. Davies," John said, picking up the envelope. "This afternoon? His office is just above the bakery, actually," Eleanor said. 2 o'clock. He'll go over all the details. There are some funds set aside for initial operating costs, too. So you won't be starting from absolute zero. It's all in there." John's mind raced. He was supposed to be at ValueMart right now. Mr. Henderson would be furious. But suddenly, the thought of stocking shelves, of the fluorescent hum, of the meager paycheck, seemed impossibly distant, part of a life that was rapidly receding. This was a different path entirely. A terrifying, exhilarating, unbelievable path. I should call the store," he mumbled, reaching for his phone. "Perhaps," Eleanor said gently, "you should call and tell Mr. Henderson that a rather unexpected opportunity has come your way, and you won't be able to make your shift. Or any future shifts." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The audacity of it, the sheer liberation in the thought, made John's head spin. To just quit? Just like that? After years of clinging to that job, however inadequate, as his lifeline. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, a newfound resolve firming his voice. "Okay, Eleanor. I'll meet with Mr. Davies at 2. He looked at her, a flicker of wonder in his eyes. "Thank you. I don't have the words, but thank you." "The best thanks you can give me, John," she said, her voice soft, "is to make the sweet spot a place of kindness and joy. To pour your heart into it, just as you poured your kindness out so freely yesterday." She patted his hand. "Now, eat your donut. You look like you could use the sugar." John did eat the donut. It was perhaps the most delicious and surreal donut he had ever tasted. As the sugar hit his system, the fog of disbelief began to lift, replaced by a dawning, fragile sense of reality. This was happening. His life, Lily's life, was on the cusp of an unimaginable change, all because he'd helped an elderly woman load her groceries. The hours leading up to the 2 o'clock appointment with Mr. Davies passed in a blur for John. After making the somewhat surreal call to ValueMart, Mr. Henderson had been predictably irate. But John, buoyed by Eleanor's quiet confidence, and the sheer magnitude of his new reality, had managed to remain polite but firm. He'd wandered through the park, trying to process everything. The weight of the manila envelope in his jacket pocket was a constant reminder. He thought about Sarah. What would she have said? He could almost hear her laughter, her excited encouragement. "Go for it, John. This is amazing." She'd always believed he was capable of more than he gave himself credit for. Perhaps this was her way, from somewhere beyond, of giving him a push. His biggest concern, however, was Lily. How would this change things for her? He wanted, more than anything, for it to be a positive change. The thought of her face when he told her they might own a bakery, her favorite gingerbread cookie bakery, brought a hesitant smile to his lips. Mr. Davies, the solicitor, was a portly man with kind eyes and a reassuringly calm demeanor. His office, situated above the sweet spot, was filled with leather-bound books and the faint, delicious aroma of baking drifting up from below. He explained the legalities with clarity and patience, confirming everything Eleanor had said. The transfer of ownership was straightforward, meticulously prepared. There was indeed a modest sum in a business account to cover initial expenses and ensure a smooth transition. John signed the papers with a hand that still trembled slightly. Each stroke of the pen felt momentous, severing ties with his old life and forging a completely new, uncertain future. When it was done, Mr. Davies shook his hand warmly. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller. Eleanor Albright is a remarkable woman. She has a keen eye for character. I wish you every success." Leaving the solicitor's office, John stood on the sidewalk, looking at the charming, slightly old-fashioned facade of the Sweet Spot. Its windows were filled with tempting displays of cakes, cookies, and freshly baked bread. A little bell tinkled as a customer exited, smiling, a white paper bag in her hand. This was his now, his responsibility, his opportunity. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now mingled with a burgeoning sense of excitement, of purpose. Eleanor had arranged to meet him at the bakery. When he stepped inside, the warmth and the incredible aroma of cinnamon, sugar, and yeast enveloped him like a comforting hug. It smelled of home, of childhood, of pure, simple joy. An older woman with flour dusting her apron and kind, knowing eyes emerged from the back. This had to be Martha. "You must be John," Martha said, her voice warm and welcoming, extending a flowery hand. "Eleanor has told me all about you." "Well, not all," she amended with a twinkle in her eye, "but enough to make an old baker hopeful." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Martha," John said, shaking her hand. I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be honest." "That's perfectly natural, dear," Martha said, her smile reassuring. "Running a bakery isn't rocket science, but it takes heart, and a good alarm clock. Eleanor seems to think you've got the heart part covered. The alarm clock we can work on." Eleanor emerged then, beaming. "John, Martha, so glad you're finally meeting. Martha, this is our new proprietor. John, this is the magician who makes all this wonderfulness happen." Over the next few hours, Eleanor and Martha gave John a tour of his new domain. The front shop was cozy and inviting, with small wooden tables and chairs, and display cases brimming with treats. The kitchen in the back was surprisingly spacious, filled with large ovens, mixers, and racks of cooling pastries. It was a well-oiled, if somewhat dated, operation. Martha explained the daily routines, the ordering of supplies, the popular items, her well-honed baking schedule. She spoke with a quiet passion for her craft, her hands moving expressively as she described kneading dough or piping frosting. John listened, trying to absorb it all. It was a mountain of information, a whole new language of proofing times, ingredient ratios, and customer preferences. He felt like a fish out of water, a complete novice in a world of experts. His experience was in stacking shelves, not crafting delicate pastries. The urge to panic, to tell them this was all a terrible mistake, was strong. But then he looked at Eleanor's hopeful face, at Martha's patient smile. He thought of Lily, and the chance this represented. He couldn't back down. He wouldn't. "I have a lot to learn," John admitted, his voice laced with humility. "A whole lot. I hope you'll both be patient with me." "Patience we have in spades, John," Martha said kindly, "and a willingness to teach. You just need a willingness to learn. And maybe an apron that fits." She winked. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You'll do wonderfully, John. I know you will. Take it one day at a time. One muffin at a time. If you like." The first few weeks were a whirlwind. John felt like he was constantly treading water, trying to keep his head above the surface. Early mornings became his new normal, the bakery's rhythms dictating his days. Martha was an incredible teacher, patient and thorough, guiding him through the basics of kneading bread, mixing batters, and even some simple cake decorating. He was clumsy at first, his hands more used to hefting boxes than delicately shaping dough. But he was a determined student. He made mistakes. Burnt batches of cookies, lopsided cakes, bread that refused to rise. But each mishap was a lesson. He learned about inventory, about dealing with suppliers, about managing the cash register and reconciling the day's earnings. He learned the names of the regular customers, their favorite treats, their small stories. He discovered a surprising enjoyment in the early morning quiet of the bakery, the smell of the ovens warming up, the meditative rhythm of preparing for the day. Lily was ecstatic. The bakery became her new favorite place. After school, she would sit at one of the small tables, doing her homework, her nose occasionally twitching at the delicious smells wafting from the kitchen. Sometimes Martha would let her help by sprinkling sugar on cookies or arranging napkins. For Lily, her father owning the sweet spot was like living in a fairy tale. Her joy was a powerful motivator for John, cutting through his fatigue and self-doubt. Eleanor was a frequent visitor, offering quiet encouragement, sharing anecdotes about Arthur and the early days of the bakery. She never interfered, but her presence was a comforting reassurance. She became like a grandmother to Lily, who adored her. Their bond was easy and natural, and it warmed John's heart to see them together, sharing a cookie and a quiet conversation. There were challenges, of course. Money was tight initially, despite Eleanor's startup fund. Some of the equipment was old and temperamental, prone to breakdowns at the most inconvenient times. One particularly stressful week, the main oven decided to give up the ghost, right before a big weekend. John, drawing on his old fix-it skills and a lot of desperate online research, managed to coax it back to life, much to Martha's amazed relief. "Well, I'll be," she'd said, shaking her head. "Maybe there's more to you than just a kind face, John Miller." His biggest struggle, however, was internal. The feeling of being an imposter, of not truly belonging in this world of skilled artisans, gnawed at him. He often felt he was playing a role, waiting for someone to expose him as a fraud. There were days when the sheer weight of responsibility, the fear of failing and losing this incredible gift, threatened to overwhelm him. One afternoon, after a particularly trying morning where a large cake order had gone slightly awry, requiring a frantic last-minute rescue mission by Martha, John found himself slumping onto a stool in the back kitchen, his head in his hands. Martha, wiping her hands on her apron, sat down opposite him. "Rough day?" she asked gently. I don't know if I'm cut out for this, Martha," John confessed, his voice weary. "I feel like I'm constantly messing things up. You're the one keeping this place afloat." Martha considered him for a moment. "John," she said, "let me tell you something. When Eleanor first told me she was giving you the bakery, I was skeptical, very skeptical. I thought she'd finally lost her marbles, giving her life's work to a stranger who helped her with her groceries. It sounded crazy." John winced. "I can imagine. But then I met you," Martha continued, "and I watched you. You listen. You try. You're not afraid to admit when you don't know something, and you're willing to get your hands dirty. You treat the customers with respect. You're kind to Lily, and you're good to Eleanor. And you fixed that blasted oven when I was ready to heave it out onto the street. A small smile played on her lips. You're learning, John. Faster than you think. And more importantly, you care. That's more than half the battle in this business. Or any business, I reckon. Her words were like a balm to his frayed nerves. You really think so? I know so, Martha said firmly. Now, that cake for Mrs. Henderson's party isn't going to frost itself. And I believe you were going to try your hand at the buttercream roses today, weren't you? John managed a small smile. Yeah, I was. He stood up, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He might not be a natural, but he was a worker, and he had good people by his side. Slowly, painstakingly, John began to find his footing. He started to understand the rhythms of the ingredients, the subtle cues of dough rising, the precise moment when a cake was perfectly baked. He even developed a knack for some of the simpler decorative work. He'd never be the artisan. Martha was, but he was becoming competent, reliable. He focused on ensuring the quality was always high, the service always friendly. He listened to customer feedback, even introducing a suggestion box. One evening, as he was cashing up, Lily by his side meticulously drawing a picture of the bakery, complete with a smiling stick figure of him in an apron, Eleanor stopped by. Busy day? She asked, her eyes twinkling. Good. Busy, John replied, a tired but satisfied smile on his face. We sold out of the apple turnovers again. Martha says my crust is getting better. I knew it would, Eleanor said, looking around the cozy shop, now quiet and peaceful after the day's hustle. You've brought a new energy to this place, John. It feels happy. I am happy, John admitted, almost surprised to hear himself say the words. Tired, definitely. Stressed sometimes, yes, but happy. He looked at Lily, who beamed up at him. We're happy. Eleanor's gaze softened. Arthur would have liked you, John, she said quietly. He always said the secret ingredient was love. It seems you've found it. She then looked at a small framed photograph on the counter, one John had recently placed there. It was of Sarah, her smile radiant. Eleanor had never asked about it, but her eyes now held a gentle understanding. She would be very proud, I think. John felt a lump form in his throat. I hope so, he whispered. He missed Sarah every day, but the sharp, debilitating grief had slowly begun to transform into a gentler, more wistful sorrow, a loving memory that coexisted with the new joys in his life. This bakery, this unexpected second chance, felt like a way to honor her memory by building a good life for their daughter. The upcoming town festival, the annual Founders' Day celebration, was the talk of the community. It was a big event, with stalls, music, and a baking competition that the Sweet Spot had traditionally entered and often won in years past. Martha mentioned it casually one morning. Founders' Day is next month. We should probably start thinking about our entry for the pie contest. Arthur's apple pie recipe is usually a shoo-in. John felt a familiar wave of anxiety. Us? Enter? Martha, you should enter. I'm not nearly good enough for a competition. Nonsense, Martha said briskly. It's the Sweet Spot's entry, not Martha's or John's. And who's to say you can't bake a prize-winning pie? You've been practicing. She winked. Besides, it's good for business. Gets our name out there. The thought terrified him, but a small part of him, a part that had been slowly growing in confidence, was also intrigued. He had been working hard on his pie crusts, following Arthur's meticulous, handwritten recipe that Eleanor had shared with him. He'd even started experimenting with a new filling, a spiced pear and cranberry combination that Lily had declared the bestest ever. What if? John began hesitantly one afternoon, as he and Martha were prepping for the next day. What if we tried something a little different this year? Alongside Arthur's apple pie, of course. He explained his idea for the pear and cranberry pie. Martha listened intently, a thoughtful expression on her face. Spiced pear and cranberry, she mused. Sounds interesting. Ambitious. All right, John Miller. Let's give your creation a trial run. If it passes the Martha and Lily taste test, we'll consider it. The trial run was a success. Lily devoured her slice, her face alight with joy. Martha, after a careful, considered tasting, nodded slowly. It's good, John. Really good. The flavors are balanced. The crust is flaky. Arthur always said, don't be afraid to try new things, as long as you honor the classics. I think he'd approve. And so, the Sweet Spot prepared 2 entries for the Founders' Day pie competition: Arthur's classic apple pie, baked to perfection by Martha, and John's spiced pear and cranberry pie. John poured all his newfound knowledge, his hopes, and a considerable amount of trepidation into his creation. He stayed late at the bakery for several nights, perfecting the recipe, ensuring every detail was just right. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving to himself that he could do this, that Eleanor's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. Founders' Day dawned bright and sunny. The town square was bustling with people, the air filled with music and the scent of popcorn and grilled food. The Sweet Spot had a stall, manned by a cheerful Lily, who was officially in charge of handing out napkins. And an equally proud Eleanor. John and Martha delivered their pies to the judge's tent, their hearts thumping. The afternoon wore on. John tried to distract himself by helping at the stall, chatting with customers, but his mind kept drifting back to the competition. Finally, the announcement came. He stood with Eleanor, Martha, and Lily, his hands clammy. The 3rd prize was announced, then the 2nd. Neither was theirs. John's heart sank a little. Maybe he'd been overly ambitious. And the 1st prize for this year's Founders' Day pie competition, the announcer boomed, goes to the Sweet Spot for their outstanding spiced pear and cranberry pie. For a moment, John just stared, stunned. Had he heard correctly? Then Eleanor was hugging him, Martha was clapping him on the back, and Lily was jumping up and down, shouting, "Daddy won! Daddy won!" A wave of emotion washed over John. Disbelief, elation, profound gratitude. He had done it. He, John Miller, former part-time stocker, had baked a prize-winning pie. He looked at Eleanor, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "I told you, dear boy," she whispered. "I told you." That evening, after the festival crowds had dispersed and the bakery was quiet again, John sat with Eleanor in the dim, warm light of the shop. The blue ribbon for his pie was proudly displayed on the counter. Lily was asleep in the small office at the back, exhausted but happy. "I still can't quite believe it," John said, shaking his head in wonder. "Believe it, John," Eleanor said softly. "You earned it. You poured your heart into that bakery, into learning, into caring. This is just the beginning." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal. "Arthur used to keep a journal," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Mostly about the bakery, his recipes, his thoughts. There's something I wanted to share with you." She opened it to a bookmarked page and read, her voice trembling slightly. "October 14th. A young couple came in today, clearly very much in love, celebrating a small anniversary. They couldn't afford much, just 2 of our simplest cupcakes. But their happiness filled the shop. It reminded me why I do this. It's not for the money or the accolades. It's for the small joys, the connections, the sweetness we can bring into people's lives. He wrote that 30 years ago." Eleanor closed the journal, her eyes meeting John's. He would have been so proud of you today, John. Not just for the pie, but for understanding what the sweet spot is really all about. You've found the secret ingredient, just like he did. John felt tears welling in his own eyes. He thought of Sarah, of her unwavering belief in him. He thought of Lily, her bright future. He thought of Eleanor, whose incredible act of faith had given him this new life. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. You didn't just give me a bakery. You gave me back my life. You gave Lily a chance at a better one." "Oh, John," Eleanor said, reaching across the table to take his hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Kindness is a circle, my dear. You showed me kindness when I was a flustered old woman in a parking lot. I simply helped that kindness find its way back to you and to this community that needs people like you." In that moment, surrounded by the comforting aroma of his bakery, with the symbol of his achievement gleaming nearby, John felt a profound sense of peace, of belonging. The ghosts of his past self-doubt, while perhaps not entirely banished, had receded into the shadows. He was no longer just John, the struggling single dad, the part-time stocker. He was John Miller, proprietor of the Sweet Spot, award-winning baker, a man who had found his purpose, all thanks to an unexpected act of kindness. His own, and Eleanor Albright's. He was home. The years that followed saw the Sweet Spot flourish under John's stewardship. The blue ribbon from the Founders' Day festival was soon joined by others, but more important than the accolades was the atmosphere within the bakery's walls. It was a place of warmth, laughter, and genuine community spirit. John, with Martha still his indispensable right hand, continued to honor Arthur's classic recipes while also introducing new creations, many inspired by Lily's imaginative suggestions or seasonal ingredients from local farms. John never lost his humility, nor the memory of his past struggles. This grounding kept him compassionate and generous. He started a pay-it-forward board where customers could buy a coffee or a pastry for someone in need. He hosted small baking workshops for local children, Lily being his most enthusiastic assistant. He made sure the bakery was a welcoming space for everyone, from the town mayor to the elderly folks who came for their morning scone and a chat. Lily grew from a bright little girl into a confident, kind young woman, her childhood infused with the sweet scents and gentle rhythms of the bakery. She learned to knead dough alongside John, her hands, once small and clumsy, becoming deft and skilled. It was clear she had inherited not only her mother's artistic flair but also her father's dedication and her adoptive grandmother Eleanor's sharp mind. Eleanor remained a cherished part of their lives, a beloved matriarch. She spent her afternoons at her favorite table in the Sweet Spot, sipping tea, chatting with customers, and offering sage advice to John, often disguised as casual observations. Her initial investment of faith had yielded returns beyond measure, not in dollars, but in the thriving happiness she witnessed daily. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a decade after that fateful encounter in the ValueMart parking lot, John stood behind the counter, watching Lily, now a high school student, expertly frosting a cake for a customer. The bakery was bustling, filled with the comfortable hum of conversation and the clinking of cups. Eleanor sat at her usual table, a contented smile on her face as she watched the scene. John felt a familiar warmth spread through him, a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. His life was so different now from the one he had once known. The constant anxiety about bills had been replaced by the fulfilling challenges of running a beloved business. The profound loneliness had given way to a rich tapestry of relationships, with his daughter, with Eleanor, with Martha, and with the community he served. He still missed Sarah, always would, but the bakery and the life it had given them felt like a beautiful, living tribute to her spirit of love and resilience. A young man came in, looking a little lost and overwhelmed, juggling a baby carrier and a diaper bag. He was trying to order a birthday cake and seemed flustered. John watched as Lily approached him with a kind smile, patiently helping him choose a design, offering a juice box for his fussing older toddler who trailed behind him. She handled the situation with a calm compassion that made John's heart swell with pride. Later, after the customer had left, happy and relieved, Lily came over to John. "That dad reminded me a bit of you, way back when," she said thoughtfully, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Just a little less flowery." John chuckled. "Maybe just a little." He put his arm around her shoulders. "You were great with him, Lils. You have a real knack for making people feel comfortable." "Learned from the best," Lily said, leaning her head against his shoulder. From her table, Eleanor caught John's eye and gave him a knowing smile. The circle continued. Kindness passed on, taking root and blossoming in unexpected ways. John Miller, the man who once thought a small act of helping with groceries was nothing, now understood its profound power. It wasn't just a new beginning for his family. It had been the seed of a whole new life, a sweeter, richer, and more fulfilling existence than he could ever have imagined. The aroma of cinnamon and sugar hung in the air, a constant, fragrant reminder of the day his world changed, all because of a simple, heartfelt connection. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that the future held many more sweet moments to come.